On June 23, 1993, John Bobbitt came home in the early morning hours and, drunk, fell into his bed next to his wife, Lorena. While he was sleeping, Lorena went to the kitchen and came back with a kitchen knife and cut off her husband's member. She then left him there with the member still in her hand, where she would later throw it out her car window and into a field. But it turns out this account that most people are familiar with hardly scratches the surface of what really happened between John and Lorena Bobbitt. Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things. And today we're talking about the very humbling case of Lorena Bobbitt and her husband, John. I honestly have no other intro. We're gonna get right into it. So first, John Wayne Bobbitt. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 23rd, 1967, and grew up in the Niagara Falls area of New York. John had two brothers, and he was only 3 years old when all of them were placed into the care of their aunt and uncle. It's said that mom is quite the addict and just couldn't care for the boys. And then according to John, his father was also abusive towards their mother. But as John grew up, he became interested in the military and eventually as a young adult enlisted in the US Marines. Lorena Bobbitt, who is actually now known as Lorena Gallo, as she took her former maiden name back. She was born on October 31st, 1970 in Buque, probably saying that wrong, Ecuador, and grew up in Caracas, Venezuela. She was the oldest of 3 children. They were also a pretty middle-class family in Venezuela. Her dad worked as a dental technician. But then when Lorena is a teenager for her quinceañera, she is gifted this trip to the United States. And she fell in love with it and instantly wanted to live there. Her whole family at first did try to immigrate to the US, but it just didn't work out for them. However, the good news for Lorena that in 1987, so she was about 17 years old at the time, she was able to get a student visa and move to the US herself. She worked as a nanny at first when she lived here, and then she eventually became a nail artist and got a job in a nail salon. The other very important thing to note about Lorena is that she was raised Catholic and she was very serious about her religion. She wanted to get married at some point, and when she did get married, she wanted to stay married her whole life, as most of us do. But for her, because of her religion, getting a divorce was like failure to both her and her family. Like, she was so serious about this and about her religion that Lorena says herself that she was a complete virgin when she married John. So next, Lorena and John meet. Lorena and John met at the Enlisted Marines Club in Quantico Base. So Lorena was staying with family friends at the time, and these friends said that Lorena, when she was staying with them, she was extremely quiet. She was very, very shy. She didn't, she definitely wasn't a party girl, but she would make an effort to go out and meet new people and make new friends. So she did actually go out with them when she could. And on this particular night, she went out to the Enlisted Marines Club. And by the way, they're both in Virginia at this point. Both of them had moved to the Manassas area of Virginia. And so this is where the base was, and this is where they met. Lorena was going to a community college in the area. So this is in 1988. She goes out to this club and she meets John for the first time, and John asks Lorena to dance. They subsequently exchanged phone numbers, and then the two began to date. Like we just established before, not only was Lorena completely innocent, but she also was this was her first relationship. She had never had much experience before John. The two dated for 10 months before John proposed. So John's Marine base had a swimming pool, and one day he invited Lorena to come and hang out with him there and swim with him. As they were swimming, John comes out of the water at one point, and he has a ring in his hand that he shows Lorena. Of course, she's very, very ecstatic, and she instantly says yes. Lorena's parents were also very thrilled about this match, and it was because they knew that then their daughter was going to marry an American. It's not exactly explained why this is so great, but I would presume that it was because that means that Lorena would be able to get citizenship or be able to stay in the US by marrying John. The two got married on June 18th, 1989. Lorena was hardly 20 years old at the time, and John was about 22. So this is the part of the video where we're really going to get into the abuse of their relationship, their toxic relationship, and very specific things that John did to her. So I know I put a trigger warning at the beginning of this video, but just for people that are sensitive to that, this is the section that's going to be the hardest to listen to. I will put chapters in this video if you want to skip ahead to the next section. I won't get graphic though, if that helps. I mean, I'll explain bare minimum what happened so that you can get a picture of what happened, but I won't be exploitative about it. Here we go. So when they were dating, as it seems to pan out a lot with partners, is that when you're dating, the person is sweet and perfect and caring and can do no wrong. And then it seems like the minute you get married, it's like a switch goes off and they're like in control now, or they feel in control, and that's when it starts. That's exactly what happened to Lorena. Now, Lorena didn't see any warning signs before they got married, but her friends actually did. Like, for example, they noticed that John would always conveniently forget his wallet when they were out and would make Lorena pay for both of them. And this happened very frequently. And then they were also just concerned about his general use of alcohol and how much he drank. And I don't blame Lorena for not seeing these things or not being worried about these things at all. I mean, we all know what it's like to be in the beginning of a relationship and you're just everything's great and you're blinded to any red flags or anything like that. And he was, other than these things, he never laid a hand on her. He was very sweet and very nice to her. So she had no reason to worry. But then it was right after they got married that, according to her, John pretty much just did like a 180 in his personality. So it started out more slow, where she noticed that John couldn't hold down a job. When he was out of the Marines then, it was only her salary that was supporting both of them. And she was a nail artist. They don't make a ton of money, so there was no way that she could keep up with all their bills. So after that is when the verbal kind of began, and John would like call her ugly a lot. And then, I mean, he'd call her other derogatory things, but he would also call her ugly frequently. Lorena ends up getting caught for shoplifting dresses at Nordstrom's and later she would say it wasn't because she couldn't pay the bills. Well, she couldn't pay the bills, so she needed to steal the dresses. She obviously couldn't just buy them for herself, but it wasn't because of the lack of money. She actually did it because she wanted to try to be pretty for John and hoped that that would make him happy if she had better, more expensive, nicer things. They had been married for about 1 month when John physically hurt her for the first time. One night, Lorena, John, and John's brother went to a club called Chelsea's. John was driving them home. He was very intoxicated and he was driving way too fast. Lorena was very, very scared. So according to Lorena, she had grabbed the steering wheel at one point because she was trying to tell John to slow down and he wasn't listening to her. And that's when John punches her in the chest. When they got home, John took her by the arm and proceeded to also kick her. The police were called, but John was the one that conveniently answered the door, so he sweet-talked the police officer, gave him his version of events, and was never arrested on this occasion. Lorena left that night and just went to her job at the salon, and she literally slept in her car out in the parking lot. She was just in shock from this incident. She was humiliated, and so she didn't want to tell anyone. She thought, another common theme we see, she thought that that would be the only time and that John would not, this wasn't a pattern, but that was just one night that John got out of control, and she thought that he wouldn't do it again. And so she was, because of all those things, she was so embarrassed she didn't tell a soul what happened. But of course, sadly, things only got worse. A lot of the neighbors even talked about how they would witness some of this abuse and how dominant and controlling John was. And also, mind you, Lorena was like a 20-year-old and she was hardly 100 pounds. She was a very tiny woman at this time in her life as well. So that just kind of added insult to injury. And things, of course, like I said, you could use your imagination, they got worse. If you want to hear a lot of the details about what Lorena says he did. You can watch the documentary and read the other sources that I left. I'll give more like examples so that you get a general idea of what Lorena claims the way John treated her. So on one occasion, John gave her a present and made her open it in front of others on Christmas Eve, even though she didn't really want to open it at that time. He pushed her to until she did open it, and the present was this tiny bikini, which it was in front of everybody. It was just like hypersexualizing her. It humiliated her so badly that she almost cried. And then he called her derogatory names and pushed her on this occasion as well. Lorena then became pregnant and was hoping that that was going to change their relationship and that would fix everything. But unfortunately, this pregnancy just enraged John, and he gave her an ultimatum, told him that it was him or the baby, and basically forced her to get an abortion when she did not want one. And you would think that she could just say, okay, then I pick the baby, and like he would let her go and she could leave. But she could not do that, because even though he gave her that ultimatum, she didn't really have a choice. He would consistently, all the time, threaten her with what would happen if she left him. She said that if she left him, that he would find her, he would follow her, he would do whatever he wanted with her. She would never be able to escape him. No matter where she went or what she tried to do, he would just find her. So there was no point in her trying to divorce him or leave him. Then he would also, of course, play the deportation card and tell her that she needed him because if it weren't for him, she would get deported, and if she left him or did this and that, he would make sure she got deported. And then I'm definitely not going to get into the details of this. Again, if you want details, I would go read more about it, but it's way too bad for YouTube. It's awful, but there was a lot of essay involved. Now, on top of all this, let's also talk about the political and social climate at the time. This was the late 80s, early 90s. In these situations, I mean, even to this day, we always find people that just say that they should have left. The person who, if you're being abused, then why didn't you leave the relationship? Basically questioning if the victim is A, lying, or B, blaming them for their own torture. So just for the record, I'm not saying that our society is great at helping domestic victims in this day and age. I'm not saying that. I'm just explaining a few decades ago, it was even worse. So there were no hotlines that you could just text or call 24/7 back then. There were some women's shelters, but it wasn't like prevalent. They weren't just like where you could Google it and find one. And Lorena, being new to the country, she did not know that that was an option. This was long before the Me Too movement. This was before anybody really considered marital essay a possibility. And on top of all that, like, Lorena did report John. She called the police on many occasions, and they had actually come to the home at least half a dozen times throughout their marriage. At one time, John did get arrested for assault and battery, and they had photo evidence of Lorena's face and her injuries on this occasion. Neighbors reported witnessing some of these events, like I said before, and not only that, but also men that would talk to John in their social time would later testify in court too, that he would go into graphic detail with them on ways and why he enjoyed essaying women. And then Lorena was also trying to get a protective order at the time against John, but it was also just taking a long time. As we know, those things are never just cut and dry and easy. So by all accounts, Lorena actually was doing everything that she could, which for decades ago is actually extremely impressive for how scared she must have been. But I would just like to remind you that there is photo evidence, and we will also talk about all the other charges against John later after their marriage ended, involving other women. Okay, now for the incident. On June 22nd, 1993, John called Lorena at work and asked her when she was going to be home. She told him not until after 8, since she was working until 8 p.m. that night. A friend named Robert Johnson was living with the two at the time, and that night John said, "Great, yay, let's go out drinking." John would claim later that they were not drunk and that they didn't drink that much that night, but his friend Robert Johnson in court would say otherwise and say that they were, in fact, drunk. The two of them came home around 3 a.m. John's version of what happened leading up to the actual incident is very confusing and vague. He claims that he just was so tired and had been drinking and he wanted to sleep it off, and he fell right into bed and fell asleep immediately. But he woke up around an hour later and Lorena was lying next to him on her back. He claims Lorena was trying to come on to him. He says that at one point he rolled on top of her, but that he doesn't remember anything after that. To be fair to John, because of what happens to him a few minutes later, I can see everything before then being a blur. However, Lorena claims that John straight up her. Again, I don't want to or need to go into graphic detail, but I will say he was holding her in a way that made it hard for her to breathe. She was in pain, she was very scared, and she remembers blatantly telling John no. After the attack, Lorena says that she doesn't really remember getting out of bed, but she vaguely remembers she went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and as she opened the refrigerator, the light from the refrigerator illuminated a kitchen knife. And for what just happened, and since all of this stuff leading up to this point is just flashing through her mind, she went back to their bedroom, pulled the sheets back, and cut off John's penis with what would later be described as surgical, borderline impressive precision. Both of them in total shock. Lorena fled the apartment with John's member still in her hand. She got in the car and she just started driving. After a while of driving, she found it hard, as anybody would, to drive with this thing in one of her hands. And so she opened the window and with her left hand chucked it out of the window of the car where it would fall into a field. She drove again to the parking lot of her job. She threw the knife away and she said she finally felt safe. John, of course, gets rushed to the hospital and the police track down Lorena pretty quickly and they tell her that she needs to tell them what she did with the penis. She willingly told them what she did with it and as close to where it was that she could remember. Police went to the field that she said it was, and luckily they were able to find it. They proceeded to take his penis, they put it on ice, and they brought it to the hospital where John was. They sanitized and cleaned the member, and then it was soon enough that they were able to miraculously surgically reattach it to John. And by the way, eventually after some recovery time, it did return to full and all functions. Next, the media goes bananas. The only information about the case that the media had at this point was what Lorena did. And then this rumor got started that Lorena did it because, quote, he always have orgasm and he doesn't wait for me to have orgasm. This was in fact a statement that Lorena made to the police, but she didn't have access to a translator at that time. She'd only been in the US for a few years, so she didn't speak great English. And so she was having a hard time explaining them to everything in English. So she says that this got lost in translation quite a bit. But the media took this and they rolled with it. They immediately paint Lorena as a very stereotypical, hysterical woman who went into a vengeful rage. There was also this racial aspect to it since Lorena was Latina. One of the articles that posted about this, one of the news sources even said that it's not, quote, as rare for women to chop off men's penises, quote, where she's from. And then John, on the other hand, is painted as just the ultimate victim. The man whose wife went into a rage and castrated him out of revenge. And even though both sides were claiming domestic abuse by the other party, most people took John's narrative as the more reliable one since he was seen as the victim at this point. And that doubled with how hysterical the society saw Lorena. There were fundraisers for John. He had just a ton of supporters. And then the jokes. Everyone around the nation was making fun of this situation, which even Lorena can laugh at that now, and even John can laugh at it now. But at the time, especially for Lorena, it was awful because it just felt to her like not only did the entire nation know about this, but the entire nation was making fun of her being abused. But again, to be fair, nobody believed that John was abusive at this time, and the society wasn't aware of all the proof against him at this point. Okay, both John and Lorena are charged for two separate things, and they both need to go to trial. John goes to trial in November 1993. His charge is marital SA. He ends up being acquitted of all charges. He would admit to holding Lorena down on many occasions, but he claimed that he only did that ever out of self-defense to prevent her from hitting him. And mind you, I believe for his trial, they couldn't present anything that John had done up until this point. They could only talk about what he did on that night, nothing that led up to it. So that helped him out quite a bit. Then Lorena goes to her trial in January 1994. She's being charged for malicious wounding. She was facing up to 20 years in prison and/or possible deportation. In both trials, John always just had the exact same thing to say, and that was, everyone is lying except for me. And while it does seem plausible at this point that maybe John is innocent and Lorena is in fact lying about all this stuff, I will explain, as promised, later in this video, more towards the end, about why it's very unlikely that John was innocent or ever telling the truth. However, while he's testifying, it is very satisfying to watch him because he does confuse himself and contradict himself on several occasions. But at the trial, and still to this day, John says that he was the one seeking a divorce from Lorena and not the other way around. He claimed that she was very angry about this and she didn't want a divorce, and that is what caused her vengeful rage. Lorena, when she was testifying and being cross-examined, she recounted the abuse and all the things she put up with throughout their marriage. Her defense team's objective was to prove that Lorena had a psychotic break, which caused something called an irresistible impulse to commit this act. Basically, she was pleading temporary insanity and that she was completely incapable of stopping herself from doing this. A forensic psychiatrist testified that Lorena was suffering from PTSD, major depressive disorder, and anxiety disorder at the time of the incident. She testified that these conditions would have made it so Lorena did not have control over her actions at the time of the incident. It was also testified that since Lorena had no avenue of escape, and as she called police several times and it never worked, she had nowhere to go. And even if she left, John told her that he would follow her and continue the abuse. So it was testified that this feeling of being completely trapped also added to her psychosis, and that she started to see John's penis as the instrument of her torture. And then many people also testified against John, witnesses that claimed they saw some of the abuse. Lorena was found not guilty for reason of insanity. However, she was required to spend 45 days in a mental hospital for a mandatory psych evaluation. However, she was released after that. Lorena had a hard time in the mental hospital, feeling just haunted by what had happened and everything leading up to that point. However, she did start talking about it and opening up to her therapist, and she says that that actually helped and helped her start to move past all this. She was able to leave the facility after the required 45 days and only continue her therapy in outpatient treatment. She also just has a happy ending. She was able to get citizenship in the US in 1994, and her divorce from John was finalized in 1995. Playboy also offered her $1 million to pose for them. And she said no. She later met a man named David Bellinger, and they fell in love. They never got married, but they did have at least one child together, I believe. And by all accounts, they're very happy now. All Lorena cares about now is shedding light on domestic violence, and she is an advocate. She understands now that it's really easy to make jokes about the situation, and she even laughs along with everybody when they make fun of her. And she says that it took her a long time to get to that point, but she's happy she did, and she doesn't care now. She's happy to make jokes about it as long as she gets to spread her message and advocate for women and other victims. John's ending, on the other hand. John tried to make his way into the porn industry, and he made a couple movies. He made one movie called Uncut and another movie called Frankenpenis. He was trying to use not only his situation and his notoriety at this point, but people's curiosity about his situation to his advantage. Which, I don't blame him for that at all, don't get me wrong. It's just sad because he got totally taken advantage of, and he thought this would make him a lot of money to pay for all of these medical and legal bills he had piled up to this point, and he totally got taken advantage of, and he didn't make that much money off of it in the end. He then got an extension surgery, but quite unfortunately for John, the surgeon totally botched it. And according to the documentary, the surgeon even lost his license over it. So if I had any sympathy for John whatsoever, it would be over those two things. However, I still don't have a lot of sympathy for him, but I will admit that sucks. And I'm guessing he probably thought he would be more successful in the industry he was trying to break into if he had had the surgery be successful. John also tried to start a band, and that failed. But let's go into the extremely solid, compelling evidence that Lorena was not lying about John. One of John's girlfriends, Christina Elliott, pressed charges against him for assaulting her violently. He got sentenced to 60 days in prison for this, but only served 15. But again, John just says, everyone else is lying except for me, and he claimed that Miss Elliott was hitting him and not the other way around. If you haven't caught on by now, John has an alcohol problem. His coworkers and his boss would talk about how he just became a completely different person when he was drinking. Yeah, I don't think that addiction is ever the person's fault, but I still think that John is responsible for his actions. So in 1999, another ex-girlfriend comes forward. This ex-girlfriend, would just call her Desiree, however, nobody knows her real name. They had met at the bar that John had worked at one point, and it was against the rules for them to become involved because she was an escort for the bar. What happened to her is particularly upsetting and awful and triggering, so I will again leave the full details to the documentary if you guys want to go watch it, or if you just look this up, I'm sure you can find the details of it online. But essentially, John was very, very close to taking this woman's life. He threatened her. He repeatedly SA'd her and gave her a lot of the same threats that were very reminiscent of what he gave Lorena. She finally had to play dead in order to get a chance to get away from him. And luckily she did, and she survived. And even more lucky for her, a 12-year-old boy who was homesick from school that day did hear a ruckus out in the hallway of his building, and he looked through the peephole in his door, and this 12-year-old boy later said that he witnessed and he testified that he saw John dragging this woman. So John did go on to serve time in jail for this particular incident. And then later he gets married to a woman named Joanna Farrell, and again, the exact same thing. She says that he on many occasions abused her. And it's just like, okay, this many women have now come forward and went into very graphic, specific detail about what John did to them, and still, to John, they're just all liars, and he's the only one telling the truth. John continues to this day to deny all of these accusations and even the charges and the proof against him. He claims that all of these women are just gold diggers and that they are just using him to get famous and get to the next spot in their life. He just denial, denial, denial. And last, probably the best fact about this case that just makes me giddy with not joy, but like with dark humor, morbid curiosity. I don't even freaking know. But John Bobbitt still sends love letters to Lorena to this day, even though she's in a committed relationship. They're straight up love letters. They're filled with apologies. They're filled with all the way that he treated her. So in some ways he does admit to what he did, how he thinks about her still. And then he'll send her all these emails calling her beautiful and admitting again that he was a quote bad husband. But it's actually pretty funny. If you watch the documentary, it shows us footage of Lorena with all of these letters splayed out on a table that John has sent her over the years. And Lorena is just reading some of them and she wants him to leave her alone. She hates it. She just wants him to go away. But then it cuts to John being interviewed and he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure she contacted me first. I think I like audibly laughed when that happened. So as you can tell, John doesn't deny that he wrote these letters, and I thought he was gonna somehow deny it. But he actually admits that it would actually be the ultimate love if they got back together and if they could somehow bury the hatchet. No pun intended. I don't know, can anybody see that as not funny other than the fact that he's harassing Lorena? So that's not okay, and that's super annoying, but it's just pretty funny how, desperate this comes off. And if Lorena was the abusive one, like he so claims all this time, why is he pestering her to get back together if she is such a bad person, according to him? Like, he just proved to the world himself that he's lying. Now, my opinion on this, other than what's already obvious, I am not diagnosing John, by the way, but he seems like a huge narcissist to me. Not diagnosing, just saying that's what it seems like from a non-professional outside point of view. But he can't stand the fact that the world sees him as this monster. I think number one, he wants control over the situation and he feels like Lorena has control right now. And two, he really wants to prove to the world that he is not a bad guy. And if she got back together with him, that would not only prove that he actually is a great guy, but that Lorena was lying all along and that it really was all her fault and that he never did anything wrong, because why would she get back together with me if I was such a bad person? So I honestly think this is just a total manipulation because he wants to protect his own image and he can't stand the fact that when this happened, everybody saw him as a victim and could do no wrong, and then the truth came out. This case is just so interesting to me because when somebody says one of their names, oh, Lorena Bobbitt, yeah, isn't that the girl that cut her husband's penis off? Or my mom even remembered it when I asked her if she remembered the story. She was like, didn't she bite his penis off? I was like, no, that's not what happened. It's just interesting that people don't know any details about this story and they just see Lorena as this hysterical, stereotypical, over-emotional woman when they don't know the whole story. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying that doing what she did is okay. But after knowing the whole story, it is a lot more understandable, and it's not the story that I thought it was going to be going into this. Okay, friends, that is going to be it for today. Please like the video just to help the channel out. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think down below, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you so much to my patrons on the screen right now, but thank you so much to my top tiers: Colin Holmes, Deck of Cards, Creep Me Out, Ryan Fenton II, Michelle Valdovinos, Tom L, JJ, Dirty Kitty, Dawn, and Quasi Eli.